I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, if you give me $50,000, I'll go home. That's the statement from a group of Honduran refugees, marchers, whatever you want to call them, who showed up at the U.S. consulate in Tijuana, Mexico, saying basically, let us into the United States or pay us $50,000 each to go away. Bill, they reportedly gave the consulate 72 hours to respond to this, and they had another demand, which was that the President of the United States should also remove the Honduran president from office, or whatever it takes to get that guy out of there. But it got me to thinking, Bill, $50,000. Not bad, considering the alternative. You know what it's going to cost to put all these people through due process, evaluate their asylum claims, keep them or send them away? Why not pay them $50,000 and send them home?
Do you know the word Danegeld?
I have heard it.
Okay. Essentially what this argument is that Vikings and other murderers descend on a village and basically say, if you pay us this amount, we won't murder everybody and burn everything. And it's just what it basically is these people, these so-called refugees, coming up to the border and saying, "Hey, nice country you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it." It's extortion, and the problem with paying the Danegeld, paying the gold to the Dane to keep them from ravaging your land, is that once you start paying the Danegeld, the Danes continually arrive, and they constantly want more, and this becomes a source of income for them.
But Bill, what they're saying is they want to go back home and start businesses.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure they do. Why didn't they write us a letter? If they'd written us a letter and said we want $50,000 to start businesses, they would have subscribed that in a few seconds. With a Kickstarter campaign, and I would have been a person happy to contribute to that. Microloans to South America and especially to Africa are the only actual solution for genuine change and progress in those places. But that's not what they're doing. So look, Scott, so much of my understanding of military history, of human history, and so on, is based on this idea of deterrence, that the ability and the willingness to fight a war and the preparation to overwhelmingly win a war is what prevents a war. That's what the money's for. We have the Defense Department, and we spend enormous sums of money on the Defense Department, although they're microscopic essentially compared to what we spend on social programs. But the reason we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on defense for weapons is not so that we have the weapons to win a war in an existential contest for survival. The reason what we're really doing is we're paying an insurance policy. We're basically paying $500 billion a year insurance to make sure that everybody else in the world understands that we're not somebody who you particularly want to pick a fight with. So, same thing with the idea of paying this hostage money, this ransom money. The first thing I want to say about this is, if they're willing to accept $50,000 to go home and start businesses, then this entire preposterous idea that this whole thing was about asylum is shown to be the lie that it is. That's number one right out of the gate. If you're telling me we're just poor campesinos and we fear for our lives and we have to have a place to live in safety and look at our children and so on, they're being tear gassed, blah, 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 but if you give us $50,000, we'll go home. Back to this living hell that we said was unendurable. It is an instant, immediate, absolute, crystal clear confession that the whole thing was predicated on using Americans' decency against them to get these people what they want. And since they didn't get the border crossing that they wanted because of some resolute action on the part of the president, they're saying, well, I guess we'll take $50,000 and we'll go home. No. Primarily because of what I said before. Look, if it were a one-case thing, if it were a one-time thing, in the scheme of things, the amount of money the United States, we spend about $10 billion a day. $50,000 is a second or two of the total government expenditure. On some level, yes, it'd probably be great, but the reason we cannot, under any circumstances, pay this money, under any circumstances, is the same reason why we don't pay terrorists for hostages. It encourages more hostage taking. The reason we don't negotiate with terrorists and give them millions of dollars when they've got these innocent people in a plane, it's, well, we can afford the millions of dollars. Of course we can afford millions of dollars to get these people home. But the problem then becomes, now we have set up an automatic teller machine. We've set up a cash machine. And basically, all you have to do is hijack a plane, take some hostages, and here comes your millions of dollars. The entire reason that we need to not pay this money is to make sure that we do not provide a precedent for other people to do the same thing. We need to create deterrence. You came all the way up here. You knew it was legal every step of the way. You were offered asylum in Mexico. If asylum was really what you were talking about, actual asylum, you don't get to turn down asylum for a better asylum. That's real estate. Shopping. So they turned down the asylum, they came to the border, they didn't get in, and now they want some money. Well, no.
Well, let's take this the next step, because he said a little bit more about this. And by he, I mean the spokesman for this group of roughly 100 of these people coming up from Honduras.
And you said he demanded, right? Is that the language
well,
you used?
I mean, demand, request, you've got 3 days to answer. It depends on how
That's
you
a
want to view
demand.
this. So it's he in addition, he said, I know $50,000 sounds like a lot of money. However, it's a fraction compared to what the United States has taken from Honduras over the years.
Oh, is that right?
They didn't flesh this out in the article, but it sounds to me like what he's talking about is, in effect, what you would call corporate colonialism, where American corporations have gone down there and raped that country and paid substandard wages, virtually slave wages, and drawn resources out of it for use in the United States. Don't you think it's fair that we give a little back?
I did this calculation in order to make this point. I want to say back in 2010 or 11. I took a look at when I was. I did a video based on our friend Iowa Hawk's research. I just put it on camera. But basically, Iowa Hawk figured out with a $3.6 trillion budget, that comes to about $10 billion a day for 365 days, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so I took a look at this idea of the United States spending. This is government spending. This is not the U.S. economy, which is far larger. This is just what the government spends. And it's, it's $10 billion a day. I took a look at the national gross domestic product of Djibouti, which was the poorest country I could find that was not, a microscopic island, or, Vatican City, which is not among the poorest countries, you'll be surprised to know. And basically what I found out was that the entire gross national product of a place like Djibouti is something like 3 hours of U.S. government spending. So in other words, the idea that we could go down to Djibouti, send the Marines down there, take everything, take their entire gross national product, take all of it, you could run the U.S. economy for probably 3 or 4 hours. If you took everything out of that country, you'd go from midnight on January 1st to about 3 a.m. on January 1st. And that's with everything that they make, everything. We take it all. That's how much it buys us. So this idea that we are taking things from the third world, that we are basically, going down there and rampaging our giant, mechanical boring machines which cut giant holes into the ground to extract the coal, and if little children get in the way, well, then that just greases the.
I think that's a false analogy, Bill, because you're talking about the U.S. government, and I think what they're really talking about is the corporations who have come down there and used Honduras as a resource pit.
Corporations have gone to Honduras. They have not gone with the Marines. They didn't go in. The very fact that they say corporations, Scott, means that it's a business
I'm attributing
deal.
that to them. I'm assuming.
Okay, and that's a fair attribution. I think that's exactly what they're talking about. I'm sure they're talking about, U.S. corporations come down to Honduras and they take the resources and leave us with crumbs. Look, a business transaction is a business transaction. It's not an invasion. It's not backed by violence and the point of a gun. A business transaction is a business deal where two parties make an agreement. Okay? It's not my responsibility to negotiate for your side. That's not my job. It's not my job.
Yeah, but if it's our corporate princes making deals with their feudal lords at the expense of their serfs.
That is the problem of the Honduran people, and they need to get rid of those princes, because corporations are not humanitarian organizations. Humanitarian organizations are something completely different. We make humanitarian organizations tax deductible so that wealthy people or not wealthy people can contribute to them, and basically take money that would have gone to the U.S. government and now send this money to the Honduran campesinos if that's the particular charity you wish to contribute to. And this is not only a good thing, it's a magnificent thing. If people talk about, the American foreign aid is so stingy, American government foreign aid is not stingy, but it's nothing compared to what private American citizens do with their own money all throughout the world. So to expect a corporation to go to some place like Honduras and say, well, what do you want for whatever the crop is? I don't want to be. What is it?
I don't know what they make in Honduras.
Okay. I was going to pick an example, but I don't want to sound.
Could be coffee. Could be radishes.
Sure, coffee.
For all
Let's
I
say
know.
coffee. Coffee. Let's go with coffee. So we're saying it's not the job of Nescafe to go down there and say, how much do you want to pick the coffee? And they say, we want $7 an hour. And Nescafe says, you know what, that's not enough. We'll give you $9. That's not Nescafe's job. Nescafe is not a humanitarian organization. I'm using Nescafe obviously as an example. They maybe have nothing to do with Honduras, so please just let's understand this is for the sake of the argument. But the coffee company or the corporation or whatever is not responsible for making the best deal they can for the other side. So if it turns out that you live in the kind of government where 2 or 3 families own all the land and take all the money, socialist Venezuela, by the way, being a prime example, where Hugo Chavez, the man of the people, left his daughter $4.3 billion American dollars. Entire country starving, Hugo Chavez's daughter, $4.3 billion. So spare me this talk about corporate greed. There's nothing that comes close to what a socialist will do. Fidel Castro had $800 million in his bank accounts personally when he died, and those are just the numbers we could find. So it's not up to American corporations to make a deal on behalf of the Hondurans. It's up to the Hondurans to make a deal on behalf of the Hondurans. And if, as you say, they have a corrupt government, then they need to get rid of their corrupt government. That's not our responsibility.
Let me make that our final
either.
question, and so we can wrap this up. We have been in the past queasy about displacing foreign leaders. However, this is one of their demands. Give us $50,000 BTW, remove our president in Honduras. Bill, don't you think that would help to stanch the flow to our border about which conservatives are so inflamed if we would just exercise a little bit of our so-called power, whether that be military might or just social pressure on Latin American states to replace those feudal lords, as I referred to them, who are crushing the people in their country so that the people would want to stay in their beautiful paradisical jungle lands?
A lot of times I have a flip answer to things because sometimes humor makes the point a little clearer. But I'm going to say this as seriously as I possibly can. If you really want to solve this problem for us, for them, and so on, the people that made this trip, by having made the trip, have shown themselves to be people of above average willingness to take risk, above average industry, above average ambition, all of these things. If you're really serious about this, rather than walking 700,000 miles or whatever the amount was, rather than coming to America and walking to our border, demanding to be let in for free, and then failing that, being demanded to give money to go home, and also demanding that we remove their government, why don't these people, who are clearly, on some level, the most energetic and enthusiastic Hondurans in the country because they went to the trouble to come here, why don't these people go home? Why don't they set up a Kickstarter campaign? Why don't they find a way to raise money to legitimately overthrow the government of Honduras through elections? And if it turns out that the government of Honduras is not willing to have elections, then you are going to have to be forced to the same kind of recourse that we had ourselves found before we had $50,000 to give away to everybody who knocked on the door, when we discovered that we had a system that was taking our money without our say-so. We had taxation without representation, and we decided not to go to war against some tin pot dictator who was sitting in a in a mansion in Georgia someplace, we decided that this ability to have money taken from us without our consent was worth going to war with the greatest military power on the face of the earth.
And we got help from France and others. So what I'm suggesting is, why not get help from the United States to remove?
But you don't start there, Scott. We don't have an obligation. Okay, we don't have an obligation to remove the government of Honduras and produce a Jefferson down there. That's a responsibility of the Honduran people. If it turns out that the Honduran president were to open fire on civilians or things like this, then you might be able to say that there is a humanitarian cause at stake that might justify threatening
forget your
military
humanitarian
action.
compassion. I'm saying national border security for the United States.
That's a different issue. But if you really want to get border security for the United States, we've talked about this several times. The only long-term solution to this problem, the real long-term solution to this problem, the win-win-win long-term solution to this problem, is for Honduras and Mexico and Guatemala and Nicaragua and Venezuela to be places that you don't want to leave. And this is why I say with absolute, genuine purity of heart, that these people should be the beginning of a political movement to make sure that Honduras has fair representation. There are any number of things in Honduras, not the least of which is tourism, by the way, that could provide a great influx of wealth into that country, but it's going to require certain bedrock changes, and those changes are not our responsibility. And furthermore, they're not only not our responsibility, we are not capable of doing it. The big bad Yankee cannot come in there and create, Philadelphia in 1782. He can't do it. 83. He can't do it. It's their responsibility. And I think the American people and people like me would be more than willing to help them if they were to say, look, we want a stable government. We want the rule of law. We want a republic. We want limited terms. We want representation. We want the rule of law because we want to have a capitalist society where we can make money and start our own businesses and live like real people. You start a Kickstarter campaign like that, and I guarantee you, you're going to raise some money. I'm in for a couple $100 off the bat. And this is an actual solution. But what you're talking about is coming up to somebody's door, trying to break down the door, finding the person willing to defend their house, and then having that person say, all right, give me $50 and I'll leave. No, because the second I do that, Scott, the second I give this guy $50 to leave my front porch, he is going to pass other people on the way back to where he's going, if he goes home, in fact, and he's going to tell them, if you go and stand on this guy's porch, he'll give you $50.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have kind of the reverse deal going here. If you give us nothing, we'll leave. However, if you become a member at BillWhittle.com for just $9.95 a month, we may be able to stay.
Don't give him any ideas, Scotty.
We may be able to stay, and many of you have made it possible for us to stay and continue this, to engage in these conversations that we think help to illuminate the light of freedom around the world. And maybe somebody in Honduras is watching this now and will gain encouragement from it because of the $9.95 a month that you pay.
And if there is somebody in Honduras, I want you to understand this. This is really important. When I talk about things like you don't get $50 for knock on my door and leave, that is the reaction of somebody who understands that the only solution is the courage of people like you to make the kind of changes in your society that the people like our ancestors in America had the courage to make, and which we continue to provide in terms of blood and treasure on a daily basis in order to keep.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful to the members of BillWhittle.com who make these conversations possible. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you very much.